Sorry, everybody.
Hello, Amal. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our stream. Before we begin and before I bring the others on, I just want to do a quick sound check just to make sure you guys can hear me. And then we'll bring the others on, make sure you guys can hear them, hear and see and everything. And then we're going to get started. So just to make sure in the comment section, how's everyone doing? We've got an English special this time. So for all the English people who so often feel out, just let me know in the comment sections if you guys can properly hear me. Okay, we've got a yes, we can. I'm going to bring the other little windows up, and they're going to start. I'll be managing the comments myself so far. I'm not sure. We'll speak with Simon and Andrew and if they want to handle some questions maybe a little bit later on. We have only got an hour, and I think they have a lot to get through, so I doubt it. But remember to keep the comments civil and clean, strictly. Okay, all right, now let me bring them on. Hello, Andrew, and hello, Simon and Cornelie. You guys are both live and online. I'm going to take myself off for now, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, Simon, and you can just carry on.
Thank you very much, Ernst, and good evening, everybody. For those of you who have not watched one of our live streams before and who don't know the guy who was just talking, that's Ernst. That's our IT genius, the guy who knows what's going on, and he always does our live streams. This is going to be, as far as I know, or as far as I can remember, our first. Our guest tonight is Andrew Hughes from Sayre, Pennsylvania. And with me is Cornelia Miller, and I am, of course, you know, Simon Roche, most of you. Welcome to this evening's discussion. The reason we've convened this little live stream tonight is because over the past couple of months, and certainly since the elections, the US elections on the 3rd of November, many South Africans have asked what's going on, or they've had comments or observations about things happening in the USA. And it's become apparent that most people don't know what's cooking. And in fact, even I only know the little bit that I do know from talking to many very, very well-informed Americans. And tonight we have one of the most well-informed of the Americans that I know, one of the most well-informed people I've ever met in my life. His name is Andrew Hughes. He is a businessman from Pennsylvania. He is a supporter of Suidlanders. He's a good friend to Suidlanders. He's been a consistent friend over a long period of time. And he's going to give us some insight into what's going to happen tonight. But I'm going to begin with a quick prayer. As we do at Suidlanders, everything that we do for a cause that is greater than our mortal selves. Lord, tonight is a very special occasion. It is a blessing for us to have Andrew Hughes with us. It is a blessing for us to have Cornelia and Ernst helping us to do something special, to broadcast to the whole world, to those people who are interested, to those who want to hear the message. What is really happening in this country, in Christendom, in the West, amongst our people, the Christian Caucasian peoples of the world. Please bless this endeavor and be with us in the work that we continue to do for you. Amen. So, Andrew, you're a businessman from Sayre, Pennsylvania. You're a well-informed guy. I want to start with a couple of statements from the mainstream media, because this is what we're getting. This is all we know. And perhaps you can contribute. Perhaps you can respond. As I know you, wild horses couldn't stop you. Okay, so as it stands at the moment, there's apparently some kind of de facto winning of the US elections by the Democratic candidate, 78-year-old Joe Biden. His running mate for vice president, being one Kamala Harris. And the BBC is saying that the latest in this context of a de facto win, Biden phones foreign leaders amid Trump standoff. So what the world is hearing is that Biden thinks he's won, and the foreign leaders are quite happy to take his phone call while Trump stands off on this matter. Trump is in dispute. And I'll offer you another comment and then invite you to respond. Biden has gone so far as to name Ron Klain his White House chief of staff. Now, what would your response be, Andrew, to this idea that Biden has won? If he hasn't won yet, he's going to win. He might as well have won.
Right. So I think there's an English word that applies here that I actually only recently became aware of, and that word is arrogation. And it's the pretense of a power that you do not have. So claiming a power or authority that you do not actually possess has the same root as the word arrogant. It's just used a lot less in modern usage. And this Biden has created a office of the president-elect. This is not an actual office. It doesn't have any kind of legal basis, but he has some letterhead. He has some I don't know what you call it, signage, for to hang behind himself at press conferences and whatnot. So he has the trappings of an authority he does not have, and he has the support and complicity of the media in this endeavor, right? And to get to the issue of the contacting foreign leaders, okay? So in the very beginning of the Trump administration, there was a man named Michael Flynn that some people might have heard of. And Michael Flynn was the Secretary of Defense for less than a week, and subsequently was forced out of office and had all kinds of legal troubles related to a rather obscure law called the Logan Act, which basically forbids non-governmental people without actual positions of authority from conducting business on behalf of the United States. So Flynn's offense allegedly was speaking to a Russian ambassador at a dinner. They were at the same table, and he had a brief conversation with the man, and that was basically enough. There were some other allegations, and Flynn may have made some legitimate missteps with regards to lobbying work with another country other than Russia. Actually, it was Turkey, the country in question, as well. But he was fundamentally ran out of his position over violations of the Logan Act, whereas you have Biden just openly doing that because the media is complicit in it, and the law is very obscure and has been violated many times. It's just a selective enforcement, right?
So, okay, so the question I think is to maybe go back 3 or 4 steps. How substantial is the argument that Joe Biden has won? Obviously, we're seeing the vote count, 279 to 214. How solid is that, would you say?
It's not. There is an official electoral college election. Okay, it's about a month away. And at that point, after that election, he possesses those electoral votes. Right now, it's just speculated, it's just projected, right? These are not certified results. And the whole idea of audits and fraud investigations and potential recounts and the tossing of ballots, which is going on across a bare minimum of 6 states. I mean, that's actually gaining steam more and more. And you're actually seeing, rather subtly, a retraction of previous confidence by some elements of the mainstream media.
Okay. For those South African and European viewers who don't understand, the US elections, or presidential elections, I should say, go on the basis of everybody casts a vote according to state. and each state gets a number of electoral votes in an electoral college. So let's say, for the sake of simplicity, that there were 10 states in the USA. They're not, they're 50. But let's say there were 10, and each state's electoral college votes were 10. In order to win the presidential elections, you would have to get 51. 10 times 10 is 100. If you get 51, you've got the majority, but it's by state. So if you win a state, you get all 10 votes. If you win a big state or a small state, it doesn't matter. You get all of their votes. In some cases, each state only has 3 votes. In some cases, like Andrew's state of Pennsylvania, it has 29 votes, and that's according to the size of the state by population. So it's kind of proportional representation in a certain sense. So the idea is to achieve 270 votes. If you get 270 votes, it means that you've picked up enough votes, or enough states effectively. You have won enough states and taken all of the votes of each of those states to secure the presidency. The claim at the moment by the mainstream media is that Biden has got about 279, so he's picked up more than enough, and there's no chance, well, he's picked up more than the 50% required. There's no chance of Donald Trump winning. But the controversy is, allegedly, that votes were miscounted, false votes, people voted, that in certain categories of vote, all of the votes were for Biden, which is obviously statistical impossible. Can you give us a bit of a rundown about that, Andrew?
Yeah, so this is quite a big topic. And there, like I said, there is about 6 states where there's irregularities, and not all the irregularities are the same, but in several states there's commonalities. So I think the first state you should probably address is my home state of Pennsylvania, which actually has 20, not 29, but not that semantic difference. The issue in Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania's own election law, which is a law called Act 77. And Act 77 permitted the use of mail-in ballots, but it laid down very specific restrictions. And one of these restrictions was that ballots that arrived after 8 p.m. on election day could not be counted. The state Supreme Court, which is an elected position, these are elected judges, and over time it had accrued a Democratic majority. And these Democrats on the court just openly violated, or they reinterpreted the law on the fly and said that because of coronavirus, they could count ballots arriving up to 3 days after the election. So that's contrary to what the state's election law says. And the United States' federal constitution says that the state legislature gets to set the rules of the election. And the state legislature, which passed Act 77, is controlled by Republicans. So you have a state court going against the United States' constitution and its own state law. So there was already a case going up through the federal courts towards the United States Supreme Court with regards to these votes arriving after Election Day. And this is not an insignificant amount of votes. So Joe Biden's lead in Pennsylvania in the current tally is about 40,000 votes. Okay. The number of votes, of mail-in votes that were counted that arrived after 8 p.m. on Election Day is in the hundreds of thousands. Okay. Vastly exceeding his margin of victory. Subsequent to Election Day, one of the justices of the Supreme Court, a man named Samuel Alito, issued an order that all ballots that arrived after 8 p.m. on Election Day have to be separated until a case about their final status can be heard. In the meantime, Democrats in the city of Philadelphia, which is one of the most corrupt places in the United States and controlled by a Democratic political machine, which has been in power there for longer than most people have been alive.
Philadelphia is in the state of Pennsylvania, for those who don't know. So we're still on the state of Pennsylvania, yep?
Yes. Yeah. Well, because the Pennsylvania issue is somewhat unique, right? Before we get to some of the others, because it is centered around the mail-in ballots and the election law. There's also allegations of fraud in Pennsylvania, but first, like we have to look at the law itself and the fact that illegal ballots were counted, right? So, in all likelihood, if this case makes it to the Supreme Court, which it will do, something of this magnitude, and there's precedence for it, several 100,000 ballots, I've heard the number 350,000, will very, very likely be essentially tossed in the trash. These were massively Joe Biden's votes, 80 and 90% Joe Biden.
Okay, so how does that happen? What's the idea here that 80 to 90% of the votes that are controversial are for one candidate?
Right, because these originated with mail-in ballots. And the way that worked was the political parties could request these mail-in ballots on behalf of their party members. And so this seems to have been a door to a lot of fraud. That basically the Democrats were requesting mail-in ballots for, it seems that some of them at least were dead people. And then another avenue, so basically dead people had stayed on the voter rolls, so the Democratic Party would send in a request for a ballot for them, and then somebody went and filled it out. And then they mailed it back in. And it was not a live person voting. Okay.
The other states, what's the tone? If you can give us a brief kind of succinct rundown, what are the kinds of anomalies or discrepancies or maybe irregularities that would substantiate your case if you say that this election is not over yet, it's still going to go to the Supreme Court, it isn't settled, Joe Biden shouldn't be running this kind of office of the president-elect kind of thing yet. What is the basis? We've heard about Pennsylvania. Give us some other examples. Why should we believe you? Why shouldn't we believe the mainstream media? They seem so credible.
Okay, well, the Pennsylvania case is already in federal court. It's already, one of the cases about the mail-in ballots was already before November 3rd, the election day, making its way to the Supreme Court. Now there's another federal case about the counting of the ballots. So when these mail-in ballots come in, the legal ones, the ones that arrive before election day, let alone the illegal ones from after election day, there has to be, according to Act 77, again, a Republican and Democrat approved observer watching every vote. This is also the case in Michigan. Michigan had the same thing happen where Democratic officials in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and Detroit in Michigan, another corrupt city, would not allow Republicans to watch the count. So there's a high likelihood that something was being concealed, right? And the proof of this is absurd vote totals that arrived, where 23,000 votes would come in for Joe Biden and 0 Trump, or 120,000 votes for Biden, 0 for Trump, which is statistically, I guess the technical term would be improbable, but essentially impossible. I mean, 120,000 people, you're going to get some Trump votes merely based on human error, let alone the fact that, you know, there's no 120,000 sampling of people that agrees on anything.
Just for interesting sake, where did the most fraud, mostly, where was it mostly able to come in? Because the mail-in ballots, I mean, every time there is a debate, or not a debate, but an issue and about how this could have changed the outcome. One example is the mail-in ballots. And then one of the mainstream media has made the statement that only 0.0004% could possibly go wrong with mail-in ballots. And they have these great debates. So what is all the possibilities? In what ways did the fraud occur other than mail-in ballots?
Yeah. So mail-in ballots have been ruled by federal courts to be, quote, prone to fraud. That's like stated case law that mail-in ballots are considered the most prone to fraud form of voting. That's already established. The secondary thing seems to be computer fraud via the voting machines. There's something that's gaining some traction now. This company called Dominion Systems, which actually comes originally from Canada, but they manufacture the voting machines and service the voting machines for about 30 states, essentially including all of the disputed states, right? And Donald Trump tweeted something just in the last few hours or so about Dominion voting systems and how many votes they seem to have disappeared or flipped. There seems to be more that disappeared than flipped. But in these heavily contested states, hundreds of thousands of votes, totaling in the millions. I believe the number was 3 million and change, simply disappeared.
Andrew, what are the chances of this thing succeeding? This idea that there's conspicuous fraud, that the mail-in votes, in the case of Pennsylvania, are, or many of them are fundamentally unlawful, beyond the 8 p.m. deadline, that in some cases you had, 1,000 people over the age of 100, let's say, voting, whereas in fact in that county or in that state or in that electoral district, there were only 17 people over the age of 100. And cases of dead people voting, and one or two cases of animals, as we've heard. You must correct me if it's an exaggeration, if it's hyperbolic, if it's false. We don't want to spread fake news. But some cases where animals were registered on a social security profile, not for social security as a human being, but where a guide dog, for instance, was registered on a profile, on somebody's profile, as part of the overall social security profile, and allegedly somehow the name of the dog got onto the ballot because the owner of the dog received a text message or something along those lines to say that, whatever Rover Johnson or Towser Smith has successfully voted. Thank you for contributing to the success of the US election. All these types of anecdotes, are they true? Are they false? I suppose is the question. And the natural successor question is there a realistic chance that this is going to be heard by the Supreme Courts and acted upon? Because again, I make the statement that the media that we're receiving, the media that we're consuming, the message that we're getting is quite simply that it's a fait accompli. He is the de facto president, or, he might as well be. And there's no suggestion that in the background there are feasible, genuine disputes. It's the suggestion, the overwhelming suggestion is that Donald Trump is being obstructionist, that he's being difficult, that he's being otherwise, that he's being combative, and he's not playing by at least the spirit of the United States presidential elections.
Yeah, well, I mean, have you ever seen a robber or a rapist or something that didn't want their victim to shut up? Of course. Fair enough. But
realistically, is this going to work? Because if the courts are as complicit in it as the media is, then it's not going to succeed. What do you think are the chances? Are these complaints valid, or are we hearing rubbish on social media about guide dogs voting, about 100-year-old ladies, 1,000 of them voting when there are only 17 in the district, that 4,000 dead people voted? Is that true, or does it seem to be true? And will the case hold?
Okay. The Pennsylvania case will be heard by the Supreme Court. I'm quite confident of that. It's all because it already started before the election. It was already moving to the federal court system. It already had reached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court had declined to hear it on an emergency basis before the election because partially the ninth justice of the court hadn't been seated in time, Amy Coney Barrett, who is a conservative, right? She had not been seated in time. There was a 4-4 opinion tie on the matter. There is now a 5-4 opinion in Trump's favor, barring some duplicity or some maneuvering with the justices. So that all it was they did not grant the emergency basis to hear it before the election. They did agree to hear it, which means it will be heard, which is the matter of the mail-in ballots that arrived after Election Day. As for guide dogs, I have not heard anything about that. I can't speak to that. Dead people, for sure. That's been proven. People have searched dead people's names to see if they come up as having voted, and they come up. The issue of centenarians, people over the age of 100. I had to look this up. In 2016, which is the latest numbers I could find for centenarians, there's 83,000 of them in the United States. I think most of us only have ever known a handful of people over the age of 100 in our whole lives. Wayne County, Michigan, which is Detroit, granted it is a large city, claims that 14,500 centenarians voted. I doubt there are 14,500 centenarians in the state of Michigan, and I highly doubt that they all voted, let alone voted in Wayne County.
But would Pennsylvania, make a big difference if that case would be, have a positive outcome for Trump? Would it in any sense make a very big difference in the outcome of the president? And how do you think that Trump would be easily accepted into the presidency, since they accepted Joe Biden so quickly? What are the chances that he would be accepted just as quickly?
Well, my counter to that would be, I don't think he was accepted in 2016. Let alone, they fought him tooth and nail. They tried to impeach him multiple times, by the way. Only the one attempt got very far. It wasn't for lack of trying. It obstructed everything he ever tried to do. It makes almost no difference. And as for Pennsylvania, you said, Biden is accounted to have 279 votes at the moment. You take away 20 votes, he no longer has 270 votes, does he? Also, the Michigan case is very strong. That's moving through the federal courts. That's another 16 votes. Wisconsin is also, I don't know if that case has been filed yet, but it's essentially the same allegations as Michigan. And once you if Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which are relatively similar states, by the way, they're in the same general region of the country. They have the same kind of demographic profile. There are three states that contain a large post-industrial urban area and kind of which is Democratic, and a red Republican hinterland, if you will. And they're relatively evenly balanced. So if those three states are flipped, Donald Trump has won. And and you might say, well, wouldn't there be another election? Well, I don't think there's time, for one thing. And if the results are in question, even if they're in the courts and not formally certified, then the Constitution states that it's the responsibility of the state legislature to send electors. All three legislatures in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan are controlled by Republicans. So it would follow that they would send Trump electors.
Okay. All right. So if you were to cut to the chase, if you were to put money, a big sum of money, a fortune-threatening sum of money on the chances of, let's call it, for want of a better word, the Trump case prevailing, and him being remaining the, what is it, 46th, 45th president for a second term? What are the chances? What would you say are the chances of this actually working?
Man, you put me in a tight spot. The forces against him are huge. The strength of his legal case is very solid. Again, especially the Pennsylvania case, and it depends on how much evidence they have in Michigan and Wisconsin. I saw something, an interview this morning with Rudy Giuliani, who's Trump's personal attorney, right, and the former mayor of New York City. That did seem to indicate they have some pretty damning evidence, at least in Michigan, like photographs. They have an affidavit from a Democrat poll observer, of all people, who simply, it was just too much.
Come to the chase. Put your money where your mouth is, man.
I'm going to say 3-1 against Trump, simply because
3-1 against Trump. Okay, so that brings me to another point. Over time, you have provided stakeholders with a lot of information on various themes, South African, non-South African, and we followed up on it quite intensively. And for about 4 months, we have been discussing an interrelated theme. You began about 4 months ago to inform us about the Project Hammer. The hammer. The hammer is the key. You then informed us about the Transition Integrity Project. Mm-hmm. You informed us subsequently about, when we held debates with you or conversations with you, Mr. Miller, myself, and you, about the likelihood of an enormous, huge initiative to steal the elections. We're talking conspiracy now. Many people are beginning to get the idea of a conspiracy now. And we've been on that page of a serious conspiracy that we've been discussing or sharing with Mr. Miller for 4 months, long before this became public knowledge. Whitney Webb has been discussing it. And as I say, you were feeding us information that was very, very, very difficult, enormously difficult to get hold of. But the point is that 4 months ago, you revealed a plan in black and white in the, let's say, amongst the most senior levels of the United States administration to hijack this election through the hammer, through the scorecard.
Yeah, this is, when you're talking about hammer and scorecard, that's something that it appears the United States has used to mess with other countries' elections. And one of the ironies of that whole subject is, according to the United States' own, I believe it's the State Department's own guide to spotting rigged elections, the United States currently checks all of the boxes of a rigged election, according to its own definition of a rigged election.
Yeah, but okay, so I mean, do you have a comment to offer on what I was talking about? This idea of the Transition Integrity Project,
yes.
The plan to use the hammer and the scorecard, the hammer being the hardware system, the scorecard being the software system, and the Dominion being the voting system, electronic system, to specifically hijack the US elections, as we've been discussing for almost 4 months now, and which might come as a surprise to some of the people watching this video. Do you have a comment on that specifically?
Yes. I mean, the first thing I would say is, there was if you're familiar with Niccolo Machiavelli, wrote The Prince. He wrote another book called Discourses on Livy, which talks about republics. And the largest section of Discourses on Livy is devoted to conspiracies. So in a republic, I mean, the primary means of political maneuver are conspiracies. And that has always been the case. And I think people are deluding themselves if they think otherwise. And with regards to this specific conspiracy, we're talking about the Transition Integrity Project. They were relatively out in the open. I mean, it wasn't run on the front page of CNN every day, but it was widely reported in various publications that are, aimed at the correct people, right? So a lot of the media there's elements of the media that are directed at a certain class of people, and there are elements that are directed at another class of people. CNN, for instance, is aimed at general consumption, or say the BBC in the UK, or whatever, the CBC, these various kind of quasi-state broadcasters. But then you get into things like The Economist magazine, or the magazine Foreign Policy, for instance, or to a lesser extent, like The Atlantic. That's for a different audience. And sometimes if you read these sorts of things, they reveal truth. It's kind of interesting how that works. They're quite open about things. And the Transition Integrity Project is a very, any description of it, you'd have to believe that they were up to something. John Podesta, who I don't know if a South African audience would be familiar with who that is.
Certainly not. Nobody watching this knows what I'm referring to when I say Hammer, Transition Integrity Project, Dominion, or Scorecard. So I'm hoping you'll elaborate, because I've kind of led everybody halfway down a rabbit hole, and they now have no idea where they are. So if you can help us, it would be good.
We'll start with the Transition Integrity Project and then work our way backwards. Because we've already touched on this idea of irrigation, and that they're using the media and claiming power, right? To fake it till you make it, right? Claim something you don't have. That's what the Transition Integrity Project was about. It was about wargaming a media response, a response by state governments that are under Democrat control to a disputed election, which is where we're at. So the Democrats created this project, Transition Integrity Project, to prepare for this moment, to come up with A, B, C, and our response to A, B, and C, and so on and so forth, planning out every contingency. And one of the people associated with this project was John Podesta. And John Podesta is the man who was Hillary Clinton's chief of staff. And he had some strange emails that were leaked that you can look into. John Podesta emails. I invite you to Google that. They're quite sinister, and they clearly involve some sort of coded language involving children. You can do your own research, but this is the man who was coordinating this Transition Integrity Project.
Okay, so what was it?
Oh, they would just basically, like, Trump refuses to leave the White House. What do we do? Right? Like, let's say we get caught. At the Transition Integrity Project, you don't just come out and say, we're going to rig the voting machines. That's left unsaid. Like, Transition Integrity Project was, we're going to rig the voting machines, and we get caught. What do we do? For instance, or we rig voting machines, we use mail-in ballots. No one specifically catches us, but people have suspicions. What do we do? That's what they were wargaming. Or Trump somehow wins. What do we do then? And one of the scenarios that they were openly discussing was taking some of the states on the West Coast, California, arguably the most liberal state. There's a couple smaller states in the East that would vie with it. Oregon, which is another, extremely liberal state, and Washington state, and And in the scenario, they would try to succeed or temporarily succeed or threaten to succeed as a means of pressuring Trump out of the White House.
Okay, so are we saying that months ago it became apparent that what might be described as the deep state or some very sinister former establishment actors collaborated to wargame a scenario, an improbable, a crazy scenario that nobody would expect, in which there was such a crisis in the forthcoming election that it would lead to a catastrophe in the society. So here you've got these very sinister characters, these really dark people sitting around the table, plotting what's going to happen in the elections, and they're not plotting whether it's going to be 271 to 208 or something like that. They're not plotting a narrow win. They're not plotting a landslide victory. They're plotting peculiar things like there's such an enormous controversy that the president won't leave.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Right. And then we've got Hammer. You sent me a piece of information months and months ago in which this article describes how a man says on his deathbed that Hammer, which we know has been used, is going to be used for a coup.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty enormous stuff. I'm hoping that you'll elaborate for the audience. You and I are talking about things that nobody else understands, and your elaboration will be good.
So I think we first have to understand the concept of a color revolution. These are revolutions that the United States has sponsored around the world to replace what it considers to be illiberal regimes with liberal ones, or sort of puppet states. And the classic color revolution was the Ukraine. And it seems, and it has been alleged rather credibly, that this hammer and scorecard computer system has been used to rig the elections, for example, in the Ukraine. And the United States in 2020 is kind of the penultimate color revolution, where you have these computer programs rigging the vote, and then you have the complicity of the media, which is the same thing that has happened in, say, Ukraine in 2013, 2014. It happened in Armenia in 2018. It happened in, Georgia, I believe it was in 2003 or 4, for instance. Serbia, before that, I believe that was 2000 or 2001. A number of countries. And now this is kind of like the final color revolution.
Okay. Cornelia? Anything?
No, it's just very interesting hearing about all of this, because we see this as the mainstream portrays it, and there is this solid case for Trump, but all the mainstream media outlets and groups state no, he doesn't have any solid evidence, and it's just crazy how they run away with it completely. But something for me, what I'm quite curious about is what would it mean, let's say this really worst case scenario, Trump, doesn't get re-elected. What would this mean, not only for South Africa, because I recently read that that Joe Biden intends to focus again on NATO and the World Health Organization, as well as the Paris support. So how would America's position change, if it would change, and how drastically would it change? Because it's even going, more further than the Obama administration with Obama healthcare and a couple of other things that they intend to bring back. So what would that mean for America's position, and also for us as South Africans? how would the relationship, completely change? Because our president immediately congratulated Kamala Harris and Joe Biden directly after the elections. And when they made the statement that Joe Biden won. So I'm just quite curious, as a South African, how would that affect America's position and our relationship with America?
So there's a video clip that has made the rounds of Joe Biden back in the 1980s when he was a senator, talking about the South African issue at the time. And he's very furious that the Reagan administration at the time isn't more anti-South Africa. He's irate that they are not more against, I guess it was the Botha government at the time, I would think, that they weren't, that the United States wasn't taking a stronger position. And he actually says on camera, "We have favorites in South Africa, damn it. It's the black people of South Africa." So he's on camera saying that. So I think he's let you know his opinion about South Africa. He's obviously a big fan of the ANC, I would think. And as for NATO, he's talked about how he wants to send more troops back to Germany, right? Which I think was one of the disappointments a lot of people who voted for Trump, was that, he promised to end or try to end our entanglements in the world. And one of the biggest glaring nonsense policies we have is our continued occupation of Germany for whatever reason. And he wants to send more troops back to Germany. I don't know, as part of NATO, among other things. He's anti-Russia and in favor of kind of antagonizing them more openly. So,
Andrew, I want to throw something else at you. About, again, perhaps 4 months ago, perhaps 5 months ago, you provided us with some very interesting information, and it led to a little bit of a debate between yourself and me, and some conversations between myself and our leader and founder, Mr. Gustav Müller. And what it came down to was that at the time of the Democratic primaries, the Democrats elected a man with apparent senile dementia.
Yeah.
And you and I discussed, why would one do that? Why would you buy a dog with, specifically, not out of sympathy, but for a purpose, buy a dog with 3 legs? Why would you buy a rotten apple? Why would you elect a man with dementia as your presidential candidate? And you and I, after some pretty intensive exploration of the subject, arrived at the conclusion that the only logical reason why the Democratic National Convention, extremely clever, competent, capable people, the only reason why they would do something so insane is in order to get rid of him, to have an excuse to get rid of that entity at a certain point in time. Now, why would you want to get rid of that entity? Well, the only conclusion you and I could come up with was for the very purpose of replacing him. And so, from about June, I would say, or July, yourself and Mr. Miller and myself have been going around this subject. It was obviously very difficult to speak about it publicly, because it's, how do you say that months before an election? It might sound a little bit crazy. And if you turn out to be wrong, well, then for sure people will think you're crazy. But that was the only substantial explanation we could come up with. Then 5 Mondays ago, or perhaps it's 6 by now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris each gave speeches on the same day in separate locations, in which they each referred to a Harris administration, the forthcoming Harris administration. So, for the sake of our audience, I'd like you to respond to that. What is your response to the suggestion that this is one enormous setup. This entire thing has been manufactured for one purpose only, and that is to get Kamala Harris into the White House. Using Dominion, Scorecard, Hammer, the Transition Integrity Project, all of these things that the mainstream media is simply not talking about, but which certain elite publications, as you rightly say, The Atlantic, and certain very, very, very obscure but reliable websites have been talking about for a huge period of time.
Yeah. I would say that there's, I can't point to the fire, but the amount of smoke is enormous. Going back to the primaries, there's so many inconsistencies about the rise of Joe Biden, right? So Joe Biden didn't participate in the first two primaries because they do each state individually during the primaries. He didn't even participate in the first two. And then he enters and the media declares him the front runner. So he already has all this media momentum behind him. Kamala Harris, I've heard multiple pronunciations, is a purposeful enigma, I think. She has claimed to be black. She has claimed to be Indian. I think she is quite half Jamaican and half Indian by origin. She was the Attorney General of California. Nobody really likes her. She was one of the first candidates out of the Democratic primary. So, I guess she's a poison pill, and you have to use the Biden sugar to Grandpa Biden. He's just a harmless dementia patient. It's gonna.
What do you think she would? To go to Cornelia's question, what do you think would be the manifest difference between her and anybody else? If I was to elect you, I might say, well, I'm electing Andrew rather than Ernst because they're just about the same, but Andrew's going to do this and it's going to be in my interest. What do you think is the manifest appeal to the deep state establishment, or the deep state, let's say, of Kamala Harris? Why her? Why contrive an enormous fabrication to get a crazy man elected? And if we're right, for the purposes of being able to say in 2 months' time, oh dear me, we didn't notice, but he's mentally ill, so he's going to resign, like Pope Benedict XVI. And oh gee, we'll rescue the situation by bringing in Pope Francis, who turns out to be magically just about as close to a Satan worshiper as you can get. And that, by the way, is not an anti-Catholic sentiment. We have many, many, many Catholic supporters around the world, and these guys are all saying one thing: can you believe this Pope? There's this enormous conspiracy. A Pope is elected, and they quickly get rid of him and bring in a guy who's supposed to be rescuing the situation, but who's just about the worst, threat to traditional Christian Caucasian values imaginable. So what do you think is it about Kamala Harris? As I say, to go to Cornelia's question, if it turns out to be she that comes in rather than Biden, why? What does she offer? Who is she? What might we expect?
Well, on a surface level, one, she's younger and has more vigor than Joe, or even many of the other Democratic candidates. Because at the very end, I believe when it came down to the last three candidates in the election, were like Elizabeth Warren, Trump, and Biden. None of them were under 70. So you only had old people, right? So I guess she's younger and has some more vigor. That's just the surface level explanation. Two, she's craven. Her entry into politics was to have an affair, I believe it was with a city councilman in San Francisco. And that's how she got her first entry, by sleeping with a married man. Like, that was her first entry into politics. So she's very craven. Who knows what kind of dirt they have on her. She's basically willing to do anything, right? And thirdly, I think that she hates the traditional American population. I don't think she holds this country in any regard. And I think that probably in her heart of hearts, she wishes she could spit in the face of every normal, decent, God and country loving American in flyover country, truthfully.
for interesting sake, she was voted the most liberal senator of all. So
Yeah.
that's interesting to just add that.
Yeah, no surprise. I mean, she was the Attorney General of California, and yeah, there's a record there. I mean, if you want to look it up, it speaks for itself.
Andrew, again, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit unfairly. If Biden succeeds, if he prevails, if he becomes the next president, and he is then shuffled off the stage quietly, only to be replaced by Kamala Harris. I don't know, as you say, there are various pronunciations floating around. What do you think the chances are? What do you think the chances are that we, as conservative Christian Caucasians watching from faraway South Africa, are going to be, at the risk of dramatizing this, are going to be confronted by a new year in which there's there's this in the background, there's this $245 trillion OTC derivatives bubble that is just getting ever bigger, and people are talking about it, daily. We've got Ray Dalio, the founder of the world's biggest hedge fund, saying today that Bitcoin is about to be, it's on the very verge of being criminalized, if that's the right word. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Going into, from a South African point of view, a collapsing economy, schisms in the USA, crisis in Europe, and to add to it all, as I say, kind of the cherry on the cake is this unelected woman who has a known hatred for the society that adopted her. What do you think are the chances that we are going into this perfect storm by February next year, or by late January next year?
I think they're pretty good because Donald Trump is up against a lot. I would not count him out, and I would strongly caution against a lot of our people out there that are so defeatist, that just want him to concede, for the sake of, there is no unity, to be preserved by conceding. This is not a normal situation. There's no point in that. Donald Trump can and should fight this by every means he can in the courts, for sure, at the least. So I wouldn't count him out of it. But on the balance, I think, just to be realistic and err on the side of prudence, I would say that it's a better than 50% chance that is exactly the scenario you are walking into, that Kamala Harris, or maybe still Biden at that point, will be at the helm of the United States. The economic bubble will implode. I mean, by their own policies, they want to reinstitute all the lockdowns, which are not feasible. We cannot economically survive more lockdowns. The math is not there.
Before we end, I just want to say or contribute to kind of substantiate your point. There's a further thing that keeps on coming up on my WhatsApp messages from the USA on that theme, and that is, I'm hearing from many, many people who supported Statelanders through the USA over 4 years, whether financially or whether through inviting us to presentations, to give speeches, hosting us, introducing us to their groups and so on. Good people that we've made friends with over the past 4 years. I'm hearing over and over and over again two things. The fracture of the USA is inevitable. Now that sounds completely preposterous. I mean, that sounds absolutely just, somebody's making it up. Somebody's exaggerating. Somebody's being dramatic. Or civil war is inevitable. And it doesn't sound realistic, Andrew. It sounds like it's taking this whole thing too far. What would your comment be to that worst case scenario before we end tonight?
My response to that would be, if you dismiss the idea of a civil war or a civil conflict in the United States out of hand, it's probably because you have some outdated notion in your head about the Civil War of the 1860s, the South and North lining up with lines of uniformed soldiers and fighting. There's very, very likely to be political violence in this country, because if Trump prevails in the courts, or if the election is stolen and that belief is spreading, right, among Trump supporters, one side is going to be very angry. And there are a lot of weapons, and there are a lot of angry people, and there are a lot of unstable people, and we have already seen political violence in this country over this last year in particular. So just because that there's not armies lined up in matching uniforms doesn't mean that there's not going to be some sort of trouble. I mean, it could be something like was seen in Italy in the 1970s and 80s called the Years of Lead, where there's shootings, bombings, kidnappings, and some come from the left, some come from the right. Many of them you don't even know who did it. They happen at a constant drumbeat, right? It could be something like that. It could be something more akin to an insurgency, right? Where one side that feels disenfranchised launches a more serious, sustained, asymmetric campaign against the other side, which occupies the federal government. Or it could even be something like as crazy as it seems, like the Transition Integrity Project itself was talking about, where some section of states, state governments attempt a secession. I mean, it's crazy. I would rank that as the least likely of the three, but it's certainly on the table, and any combination of those three scenarios are certainly possible.
Wow, that's incredible. It's inconceivable from an outsider's point of view that these things could be realistic. And I wouldn't bring up the question, except that I'm getting WhatsApp messages every second day from people that I know and respect, and people with whom, who have solid minds, good brains, sending me these apparently absurd messages by WhatsApp to say, oh, dear me, this is going to end in civil war. And you think, no, buddy, that's surely not. But by the 50th message from the 50th dude that you know and respect in the USA, you begin to think to yourself, well, are we just naive? I mean, is this actually realistic, that this electoral conflict and everything that has preceded it over particularly the past 5 years? So we're talking now about Black Lives Matter, and prior to that, Antifa, in the run-up to the 2016 elections, that what we've seen manifest over the past 5 years, loosely speaking, that is now going to culminate in something as dramatic as the things we're talking about. It sounds crazy.
Yeah, but as much as we spent this time talking about these high-level intrigues and conspiracies, right, there's also an element of chaos in the world that isn't controlled, right? You put out messages to people through things like the mainstream media. There's a certain element of the population that takes them very seriously and that will act on them, and if you go back to like 2017, I believe it was 2017 or 18, there was a deranged individual that came to a baseball game where a bunch of Republican members of Congress were playing baseball. They were practicing actually for a baseball game. And he shot a bunch of them because of basically CNN, because he watched CNN. That's, so how many of him are there out there on both sides in a country of 300 million people? So there's that element out there that's not even part of any conspiracy. And I don't think people should discount that when people talk about, violence originating from the election.
Cornelia, anything from your side?
No.
Ernst, I think that's about it. How long have we been going?
Hello, Simon. Yeah, we've been doing it an hour. You guys have been great. Thank you for everyone who's been watching. I'll put my face on, you can just hear me now. Thank you for everyone who's been watching, for everyone who's been commenting. Andrew, you got a lot of good feedback in the comments. Definitely can hear you, know what you're talking about. And I think it was a good discussion. People in South Africa, Andrew, I try and put up articles of the things that you mentioned, because I know I've seen them myself. But Google being, you have to struggle. It's a struggle to find the not anti-Trump articles to put up there, even though you know it's there. But Google, everyone's working. This whole system is working together to squish this kind of information.
People should Google Whitney Webb. That's
Webb.
My advice to people in South Africa. Read everything that woman has written. She's one of the few people that's doing real reporting, and part of it's because she's an American who lives in Chile, so she's not not as subject to pressure.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so thanks.
Well,
thanks.
Ernst,
Yes,
thank you very much for this evening. Cornelia, thank you very much. Andrew Hughes of Sayer, Pennsylvania, good friend to me personally and to Safelanders, thank you very much. Listeners, people who watched tonight, thanks a lot for watching. We hope that you liked this video. If you did, please press the like or the stream, press the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share. If you've got friends, if you've got family, if you've got workmates, colleagues, fellow people, our blood, our history, our culture, our traditions, who need to hear this stuff, who are struggling to hear this stuff. And if you think they may benefit from one of the messages that we produce, whether it's this one or another one, share it with them. We expect, Alice will let you know, that we may have a terrific interview next week. It looks like Cornelia has lined up a fantastic live stream interview for next week, Thursday, again at 7 p.m. South Africa time. Excuse me, my voice is exhausted after a long day. Ernst van den Berg will let you all know through the Safelanders leadership channels, the WhatsApp groups, and so on, as soon as that's confirmed. And we may have another fantastic one for the following week. So stay tuned. We'll try to bring you as many of these live stream interviews in English, and we're hoping Flemish, and we're hoping Dutch and Afrikaans in the next few weeks as possible. Andrew, once again, thank you very much for your willingness to come on tonight. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I have no doubt that you and I will speak again in a couple of hours' time, as we do every single day for the past 4 years.
Great.
Thanks, Simon.
Have a good evening.
Cheers.